Great. Well, welcome everyone. Really happy to see you all here. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about admissions websites and the different strategies to take and different ideas around what the role of admissions websites is. So just to give you an introduction, my name is Suzanne Dergacheva. I'm one of the co-founders of Evolving Web. I also am our Drupal practice lead, and I'm active in the Drupal community. I run the Promote Drupal initiative. So happy always to talk about all things Drupal. And if you have any ideas around Drupal marketing initiatives or just the Drupal community in general, I would love to chat with you. And in my role at Evolving Web, I do a lot of strategy with our clients. I work with a lot of our higher education clients, and so often talking about how to translate strategy work, like what I'm talking about today, into actual Drupal projects. And like I said, we work with a lot of higher education like universities, colleges all over North America. And so I'm going to be drawing on some of that experience today, and would also love to hear your feedback and kind of best practices that you have, or ideas or questions that have come up in your projects. So I'm going to definitely have time at the end for questions. All right, so to start off with, I think going into a lot of projects where I'm working on admissions websites, or a website that has a real focus on admissions and recruitment, there's kind of this assumption that the goal is really clear. Like, we're building an admissions website and the goal is to just get more applicants, get more people in the door. But actually, that can manifest itself in really different ways for different organizations. And I think starting off a project where you have the opportunity to redesign such a site, or reorganize the content, or make iterative improvements, it's really worthwhile asking about the goals from the admissions team. So depending on the institution, sometimes there's an admissions team for the undergraduate students or graduate students. Maybe there's more than one group of people involved. Sometimes recruitment's a little separate, and maybe there's a team of people going out there recruiting internationally. But whoever these stakeholders are who are kind of driving the institution's admissions and recruitment strategy, it's worthwhile asking them, like, what are the goals? What are you trying to accomplish? Sometimes there's a problem not with getting more applicants, but actually getting students to accept an offer after they've been accepted. Or sometimes there's a drive to get more international students, or a more diverse student body. And so there might be kind of different things that actually you're trying to do in terms of the overall strategy that can really impact the website. And then when we look at how the goals feed into what we want to do on the website, I find that we can probably group everything into three main categories. We can definitely come up with more specific goals, but in general, the three types of things we're trying to do are to build the reputation and build awareness of the institution, of the school. We're also trying to help guide potential students into the programs that they're looking for. Often that's a big part of admissions, is just trying to figure out, like, what am I eligible to actually apply for, or what programs are available and what's different about them. There might be new programs that aren't self-explanatory, or that don't kind of map to what other institutions offer. And then there's also the goal of trying to get users to take the next step. So, I mean, that can mean actually applying, but it could also mean the next step being applying to a scholarship, or taking a campus tour or just downloading some more information in the form of a view book or watching a video. So next steps can be kind of smaller goals within the bigger maybe process of application. So if we take these goals, these larger goals, it's worthwhile digging in and really getting a little bit more specific. So if you're starting off a project and all you hear is, oh, we need to help make it easier for people to find what they're looking for on the admissions website, that's not really a goal. That's just a category of a whole bunch of goals that you might have. So digging into the details is really where you're going to be able to come up with things that maybe you can measure, maybe you can actually have more of a plan for how to accomplish, like you can come up with a wireframe that shows how you're going to address this, or you're going to have an actual like task that you can give a developer to do that's going to help solve the problem. So these goals, should be a little bit more specific. And it really, again, kind of depends on what kind of institution you have, how many programs you have, what the pain points that students have when they're applying. Your goals are really going to vary. And again, it's important to listen to people running admissions, but it's also really important to listen to students, and you kind of have to take both into account when you're doing this. So one thing I've heard sometimes is, we're launching a new campus or a new program, and we're really trying to get applicants, but it's more important that the students who are accepted actually get through to the end of the program. And they really have to understand what's involved or what the campus experience is going to be like, because that's what our main goal is just to get the students to succeed, rather than just the number of people applying overall. So that might be an example of like a more nuanced kind of goal. Increase the number of students that finish the program. So the tactic there might be something like make sure that the programs are really well explained, or that it's really obvious what the student experience is going to be like. So you might have other goals around, just helping students select programs, maybe helping them distinguish between one program and the next, or helping them pick what campus they're going to attend. So that might have an impact on the programs that might be available to them. And then in terms of getting users to the next step, I find this is an area where you really have to listen to people, but you also have to listen to the data. And if you actually have analytics on your existing site, it might help tell that story of, well, what do people do before they hit apply? And if you actually have that information available, I think you can count yourself lucky, because sometimes it's not that obvious, or maybe applications aren't actually being tracked because they're done on a separate platform. But if you can at all tell like what people tend to do before they apply, you can also use surveys to get this information. It can help you define kind of more intermediate goals, and that can be really helpful. So for example, if you want to measure like signing up for info sessions, because people who sign up for info sessions are way more likely to apply or to have a successful application, that might be a good thing to aim for. And then we also hear things like, we just want to reduce the number of people calling us to ask how to get through the admissions process, or, tons of people have questions about scholarships. We want them to stop calling, and just that's going to maybe help you define some more key things that this website needs to do. So I wanted to hone in on a few things that I think I tend to hear a lot in terms of goals, and are maybe things that tend to be problematic, or just maybe difficult conversations when you're planning out an admission site. And so I just wanted to walk through a few of these kind of strategies that you might consider. So the first one is all about establishing reputation. And I find that, especially with institutions that are well known in a lot of communities in a lot of places, people tend to assume that everybody knows all about your institution. And by the time someone gets to the admissions website, surely they're just ready to, take the plunge and attend this school. And I think that's just not true for a lot of segments of our users that we might not be considering. So especially if your goal is to attract international students or to try to get the word out there to more diverse audiences, there's definitely going to be segments of users that are not familiar with your institution or what it's like to go there. And so I think it's important to have information that kind of signals this is what the experience is. This is going to give you an idea of the sense of place, the sense of what this community is like, and what the differentiators are, and just making that really clear. I think that that is a really important role of the admission site. And sometimes in terms of like the overall governance of here's the plan for all the websites at this institution and what the role of each website is, sometimes that might be left to the home site. And we might just think, oh yeah, the home site's telling everybody what Stanford does. The admissions website of this school or of this department, like it doesn't need to tell that story. Whereas actually sometimes, people don't distinguish so much between one site and the other. And even if the main site is telling that story, the admissions site surely needs to reflect it. So the role of the admissions site is usually not to tell potential students all the details of what every aspect of life on campus will be like, but it is to kind of hint at the main things that make that experience stand out and make it unique. So we talk about this as like evergreen content that's going to be able to live and last a long time, and you don't have to update it every year, but it should hit on kind of the main things that are key to the experience. And a couple just specific points here that you might consider. So creating a sense of place, this is often done with visual content. So if you have one nice video or a handful of images, this is going to do a great job of creating that sense of place. Emphasizing the institution's priorities. Sometimes this is just, there's one quote or a big banner or maybe a few facts and figures that you can pull out, and just what you choose to put in those kind of main sections of maybe the main page of your admission site. What you choose to focus on kind of shows like, what does this institution or what does this particular faculty, like what is the priority? What do they think is important? Telling student success stories is also a good way to build reputation. And sometimes that can be, success story of actually an alumni or a current student, but just something a little bit more personal that speaks to, this is what you can do. This is what you can accomplish if you go here. And then some differentiators in fairly plain language. And what's important here about the plain language part is that if you're trying to attract, again, a more diverse audience, international students, and certainly you want to be also speaking to parents and other influencers, it's really important to make this content accessible. So another strategy that you might consider, and this kind of balances out the reputation building, is that, yes, when someone arrives onto your site, you want them to see, well, this is why I would attend this school. You want to make that good elevator pitch. But to get them there, you might need to do some lead generation. And this might be like a kind of something we're not used to talking about in higher education, because I think a lot of times we just assume, oh, well, everybody knows that this institution exists. It's been around a while. We're just going to, rest on our laurels and know that people understand who we are, and they're gonna come to us no matter what. They're going to apply no matter what. And that might be true. But again, it might not be true if you're trying to reach new audiences. It might also not be true if you're trying to promote new programs or kind of shift a little bit that normal workflow of who's applying, where are they applying from, and what are they applying to. So if you're trying to kind of make changes to admissions and you have a goal that requires you to get in front of new people in new ways, sending new messages, then some degree of lead generation might be required. And lead generation meaning creating content that actually pulls people in. And that can be done in different ways. It can be done through SEO strategies that are going to look at organically pulling in new audiences through appearing in search. It can also take the form of an ad campaign, AdWords or something like this, or it could take the form of more presence on social media. And in any case, the content that might go into such a lead generation effort, it shouldn't just be there for SEO purposes. So if you hire an SEO person and just say, oh, we just want to get more traffic to our site, they're going to be able to do that. And they're going to be able to come up with all kinds of content to do that. But it might be not really be content that represents who you are, and it might not really be the right fit. And so when we're talking about lead generation in the higher education context, you probably want the content you're creating to play multiple roles. You want it to be like this multi-purpose content. You really want it to get the interest of students. So you want students to be interested in it if they actually fall upon it and are exposed to it. So prospective students should be excited by this content. It should also build your SEO credibility, which means it should have certain keywords in it that are attracting the audiences you're trying to get in front of. And then it should also support the recruitment efforts. So if you actually have staff who are trying to recruit and they have specific things that they want potential recruits to do, like attend an info session, then it should also serve to actually put those links to that next step in front of the user. You want content that tells a story, answers students' questions, and really serves these different purposes. And this kind of content could take a lot of different forms. So I'm just saying content, but it could mean different things. So one thing you could do is you could just think about, okay, we already have program content on our website. How do we just optimize what's there to make it to improve the keyword matching with certain target keywords? Or it might mean creating landing pages for specific attributes of the offering that you have. Like if you're trying to promote online learning, maybe creating landing pages around that is going to be the most valuable thing. Maybe if you're trying to get people to consider around the campus, around the location. And then it's important that all this content actually, it's supporting the recruitment. So if you are creating landing pages, or you do have program pages, or you're creating some new kind of content like new blog posts or testimonials, that those all lead back to some useful call to action. And finally, another thing that you might consider is that a lot of potential students are doing their research and they're finding this admissions site or this admissions section, and they're finding lots of information there, but they are also finding content on YouTube, they're going to Reddit, there's all these other places where they're looking for other perspectives about your institution. And these are places that you can also operate. And so it's good to just have an awareness of what these places are that people are going to look for information about what the experience is like, what different programs are like, different differentiators of different programs and institutions, but it's also possible to participate in these conversations, like doing an Ask Me Anything on Reddit, or making sure that your content is showing up on YouTube alongside whatever else is there. So a few other strategies I wanted to just bring up. One of those is going back to this idea of giving users the chance to take the next step. So I think that this is really valuable because it helps you have other forms of engagement that potential students can participate in before they apply. So if you have an audience that's already really familiar with your institution, maybe it's somebody going to high school in the local area, they have friends who have attended, they've maybe seen campus before or can easily go drop by for a visit, then these intermediary steps might not actually be something that's happening through the website. It might be happening in a more ad hoc way. But I think for a lot of audiences that are coming more from an international context, or for people who don't have that connection to your institution, local connection or connection of knowing somebody who's been there, then it's more likely that the next steps that they would take between discovering, oh, there's this great program I want to apply to, and actually applying, these steps are more likely to take place online. And so these intermediary steps could be anything from just downloading a viewbook to something like using a tuition calculator to see, can I afford this school, or signing up for an info session. But for certain programs, certain admissions processes, there might be other steps. So this screenshot here, this is from a website we designed for OCAD University, which is an art and design university in Toronto. And in their case, they have a really important step, which is that students have to prepare a portfolio before they apply. And so preparing that portfolio and getting more information about the requirements for that, that's a huge thing that all the prospective students have to do. And so being able to encourage that, encouraging these applicants to get help with that is a huge area where it's going to have an impact on the success of those students in applying to the right program and having a good application that reflects their experience. Speaking of steps between discovery and applying, actually finding the right program is a really important part of this whole admissions process. And it's been shown in surveys with students that they're often actually picking a program rather than picking an institution. So they might be first thinking, oh, this is exactly the thing I want to study. Let me look at all the schools that offer that program. Or they might be kind of looking at schools in their area, but then the real decision comes down to, well, which one of them offers the program that's the best fit for what I'm looking for. And so, how can you help with this? So you can provide a nice way for, especially if you have a lot of programs, you can find a nice way for to actually allow prospective students to explore the programs and without overwhelming them with information, actually give them a little bit of a search interface that lets them pick and choose and figure out what they're interested in. That can be hard to do if you have hundreds of programs, to not make that experience overwhelming, which is why it's important to look at it from the student perspective and think what their most important search criteria would be. So is it more based on the type of learning experience? Is that how they're picking a program? Or is it more based on the topic or the faculty offering it? And remember that the potential students don't have an awareness of your organizational hierarchy. So whatever tools you give them to search for programs, it should really be based on an understanding of where they're coming from and the fact that they don't really know the difference between maybe one faculty and another, or they're interested in this program that's interdisciplinary, but they don't even know it's interdisciplinary because they are brand new to this. So just keep that in mind, and keeping the search interface relatively simple is probably the best approach with this audience. So a couple final notes I wanted to bring up before I open it up for questions. I wanted to touch on a couple challenges that I see with any kind of admissions recruitment website. And there's two big things here that are kind of related. The first is governance. So one thing that I've seen in working with different institutions is that often there's a lot of shared content between the admissions website and like the larger ecosystem of sites. And there's also a really important factor to success is having a coherent brand. So your goal is that admissions doesn't look like this other website. So maybe it's not, maybe it is just a section of the main website, or maybe it is just a section of a faculty website that you're building out here, or a school website that has its own admissions program. And you want to make it seem to the user as being this coherent experience. At the same time, there might be a lot of different departments and people involved in creating the content that's needed to create such a website. So in some of my recommendations, I was talking about program content. I was talking about things like having testimonials. Maybe you have info sessions, maybe those are actually events, and there's kind of event content, and figuring out who owns this content and who's driving it and where it lives in the overall ecosystem. This is an important thing to figure out for your admission site to be successful. It's also important, this coherent brand. I mean, when we think about brand, sometimes we just think about, well, what does this website look like? And more institutions are adopting kind of a common look and feel, maybe a theme that's shared across, the hundreds of Drupal websites that are run across campus. And that goes a long way to making that experience coherent. But there's also other forms of brand coherence, like just the overall messaging, focusing on the different institutional differentiators, the tone of voice. So thinking about coherence more broadly is also going to help, and having some kind of governance in place where it's clear who's driving that is a good idea and can help with the success of the project. And then another challenge that I see is, again, if there's more than one website in play, guiding users to that can be a challenge. So, someone coming in for the first time, they're researching a school, maybe they're coming in and they come through the home site, they come through the homepage of the university, and they're looking for, okay, how do I apply? And the wayfinding that takes them from there into actually an admissions website that's more dedicated to them, this is something that's really important to map out. So there's a lot of benefits of having kind of, because institutional websites can be so big and have so many menus and links, there's a benefit to having a standalone site that is just designed purely for prospective students. It allows us to focus the information architecture on their needs. But having a separate site then means that you have to give the right links and have pathways to that site. And so making sure that that's placed in a way that makes sense on the home site can be really important. And especially when you take into account the fact that maybe there's an undergraduate admissions site and a graduate admissions site, and maybe there's another section somewhere for continuing studies. And so the wayfinding can be a little bit complicated. And since this is such a crucial audience, you want to make sure that this type of wayfinding doesn't get buried and that it's really clear where people are supposed to go. So before we close, just to take us back to goals, I think if there's anything you want to take away from this presentation, it's the idea of really thinking, taking the time to just think, what are the goals of this website with regards to admissions and recruitment strategy? Are there any things that we're trying to change in our recruitment methods and policies, and how should that feed into what this website actually does and the type of content it has? And even if you don't have a lot of time to plan out and spend tons of time on strategy, just a little bit of time thinking about that and defining some goals, and then coming back to them throughout the project just to think, oh, are we still on track? This can really help make the difference between an admissions website that's just does the job and one that actually does a good job and pushes the needle on some of these metrics. So before I go to questions, I'll also just mention Evolving Web has a Drupal training program. So if you're at all interested in kind of expanding your Drupal knowledge, or you have a colleague that is interested in this, we have a whole bunch of trainings available, and you can always reach out to me for more information. So I see there are some things in the chat. I don't know if those are questions, but feel free to unmute and ask questions or throw things up in the chat if there's anything you wanted to ask or any comments you have.
Suzanne, there's a question about the slides, if they're going to be shared.
Oh yeah, I can share these. I don't know how I should share them, but I'm happy to share them.
I guess you could paste the URL into the chat, and for people that are here now, and then I can copy that and put it in the event description.
Sure, yeah, feel free to. You might have to just request access, but feel free to do that, and I will get those shared with you.
Thank you.
Somehow.
I have a question.
Yes.
Suzanne, hi. I was wondering, what part do you use analytics, and if so, what do you use, what data, and what do you use it for?
Yeah, it's a great question. It can be, yes. So using analytics is a good.
Yeah, do you have time now to get lunch?
I can either go now or I can wait till noon.
Yeah, using analytics is a great tool, especially when you're in that early stage when you're trying to figure out what is working now, or what is not working well, what kind of are these intermediary things that people are doing on our current site that we want to know more about. But there's always limits to kind of the role that analytics can play, because keep in mind, if you're measuring behavior on your current site, it's users behaving with respect to how your current site is set up. So you might see, oh, nobody's going to our program pages. What was Suzanne talking about? But maybe the program pages are just really hard to find. And so that's why nobody's going to them. So analytics it's always something to be taken with a grain of salt. But what is really useful is to start with some overall goals. I'll also ask users, because sometimes you just make assumptions based on what stakeholders say, and it's always a good idea to ask users. And then that can always lead to some questions that you want to ask from analytics. So questions might be things like, where do users actually go off and consult on faculty websites, because they're using the admission site for one thing, but maybe they need to actually go and reference a faculty website to to find more information about a program and how are they, when are they doing that in the process? And maybe that's going to help you understand how to make your own content more useful. But it's usually iterative. After you've launched a website, then that's always a good time to continue tracking the analytics and see if what you expected to happen is actually happening. Other questions or thoughts?
Hi, can I ask a question?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
It's a very general question. I was just wondering how detailed would you get in terms of information with regard to a selective program a student would be interested in and getting more interested in the school overall? Would you just describe the program and create links that take the student further into details, or would you actually end with giving a contact to someone the student could reach out to and speak with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this is one that, we've gone different ways on different projects. Sometimes unfortunately, the way it goes is like it depends on who wants to own that program content and whether it actually lives within the website we're building or whether it's the faculty that really wants to own that space, and maybe it's a general admission site and we just link over there. But I would say it's beneficial to put quite a bit of information about the program on the program page. I would go for more than less. Contrary to popular belief, people are willing to scroll. Sometimes people say, oh yeah, like Gen Z, like they don't like to read long pages, or, we don't want to make people scroll too much. But in terms of an important decision, like selecting the program you're going to study for 4 years, people are willing to look into that information. I think what's really important is that there's a good hierarchy of information. So the thing that's going to be problematic is that if you just have a wall of text. But if you're able to have enough structured content for your programs that you can distinguish between, here's the information about the requirements, and here's how it fits into your career, or here's like a little testimonial that kind of breaks up the text content a bit. These types of things can make the content a lot more engaging. And then for absolutely, like you say, like speaking to somebody about it, maybe having that be the next call to action and having that be a prominent link on the page, that's a great thing to do with program content. And you might even consider putting that call to action, making it sticky, or having it be there even before the end of the page so that people know that there is a next step to take.
Thank you. I would have a follow-up or another question in a similar direction. Telling stories, successful stories of students. Do you keep those stories, or do you recommend to keep those stories rather anonymous? The names are not the accurate names, or or do you ask for permission to give an original story with even a name, and the student who is looking and reading that at that story and reading that story could actually reach out? I mean, today you could easily find a person's contact. I don't know, how would you encourage that or be very careful?
That's a great question. I've never heard of people using, I think it's expected that if you have such a testimonial, and if I go back in my slides to this, for example, like these would be real people. We would expect them to be real people. In this case, they actually recorded a very short video, which is very powerful. This is from the Brown website. And so I think that you would expect to ask permission and for these to be real testimonials. I think it would be tricky to find like this is the right testimonial to use and then to actually have these particular people available. But the other thing that I've heard of that has been successful for some institutions is to have a chat available where you can actually talk to a student. So chatbots are becoming more common and they're used for different things in different ways. It's something you might consider experimenting with on an admission site. And but rather than just it being, here's a chatbot that's going to answer your questions, then it's an actual bot, have it be instead a way of connecting to a student who you can actually talk to and get answers from. Might be easier to set that up as, again, like kind of info sessions with a current student or an ask me anything type of format. But definitely something like that is powerful. And in interviews with students who have recently selected a school, it's often something that they mention, that speaking to somebody who goes there is a big decision-making factor.
Thank you. Great idea.
Any final questions before we wrap up?
Well, thank you so much, Suzanne. That was great. And it's all being recorded, so I'm sure I'll watch that a few times.
Okay, perfect. Well, I really appreciate all of you coming out, and yeah, it was fun to put this together. So feel free to stay in touch and enjoy the rest of the camp. And
Thank you.
leave my email here if you want to ask any more questions. Thanks, everyone.